the taxes they collect are never enough to cover the costs that they have basically allowed themselves to go into. So they go more in debt, right? What does that mean long term when you say 15, 20, 25 years or whenever that perceived retirement age is? It is extremely, in my opinion, extremely unlikely if you were to have even just the same amount of money that your tax bracket is still 30%, it's probably much more likely to be 40%. So
Right.
you deferred the purchasing power. And that is the connection, right? If we go with 5% inflation for 20 years, everything is double in 20 years. It's an
Right.
easy calculation, right? So even if you had the same money with $100,000 you have right now, you can pay and buy twice as much as you can in 20 years. It's very, very likely that your tax rate is going to be higher. So you're denying yourself all kinds of stuff for this false belief that by deferring the taxes now, paying them right now, and then take the rest and invest it, that you're somehow better off. That's why I said it's foolish.
All right, guys. Hey, welcome to another episode of the Practical Wealth Show. So I have a special guest for you today, Dr. Axel Meierhoefer, and he is the guest on the Ideal. He's the host of the Ideal Investor Show. I was recently a guest on his show,
Right.
and the show we call it The Path to Early Retirement. And so we were talking to each other. It was a few weeks ago, right? And we had a lot of synergy. So I was like, you got to come to speak to my group. So here we are. And turnabout's fair play, as they say. And so, Axel, tell them what I didn't tell them, and tell them a little about yourself, and let's talk to these people about how to get out the rat race.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, I originally came from Germany to the United States several decades ago, and I was in the military. And then when I retired from the military, I did a little bit of employment for a few years and then started my own business and started to think, okay, well, what do other people in business do if they don't forever want to basically work until they die or something like that? And I learned pretty quickly that you can do two things. You can have a business and grow and scale it and basically work by growing it and adding more and more people to, in a sense, make yourself obsolete. And you can either sell it or you can still own it and have, the team basically run it. Or you can have alternatively a practice which is much smaller, not so much built to replace yourself. It's more like in the support of people on a more hand-holding, one-on-one, deeper relationship kind of stuff. And that's what I wanted. But it also meant if I do this, when that practice closes, there isn't typically a whole lot left. So you have to do something to be able to close it at some point. And so I looked, what could I do, and found real estate. And I had been moving around so much with the military that I was pretty familiar how that works with renting and living in a house and stuff. And that's what I wanted to do. And that's how Ideal Wealth Grower started.
Wow, that's great. It's funny because that's that's the story of my life. I'm looking at that going, all right, how big do I want to grow this? Because most businesses think they're going to have, not most, but a lot of medium-sized, the small business is still like 5 million or so, like 10, something crazy. And they're thinking they're going to have this big exit, right? And then live off of that. And I think it's one thing you talk about. I think that's a mistake. I think you should build assets because the business is going to give you a lot of cash flow, got a lot of tax breaks. And I think you need to employ your capital to buy other cash flowing assets, and, in whatever asset class you like. So, which are the 4 asset classes, which is business, real estate, paper, assets, and commodities. So in this case, we'll talk about the real estate, but the business is the engine to get money, get capital to kind of build that. But, do you think you should be monitoring? Like, do you talk to people about literally tracking, here is my financial independence number, if you will, and here are the assets I need to do that? Tell them about that your thought process.
I mean, the thing, You're right, and that's why I make, like, even in my communication, the distinction between practice and business, because for a practice there is a deeper relationship. Like similar relationships like what people develop if they can with their dentist or with their medical doctor or stuff like that. But then, and I've tried, by the way, to convert the practice into a business by bringing on people that I at least believe were in some cases better than me in what we're doing. But the people that wanted to work in this practice, that wanted basically our medicine, our approach, our support, they wanted that from me, right? And so at some point I just had to give in and say, okay, if they want to work with me, I only have a certain capacity. And that's also where what we call, and your question goes in that direction, we call that the time freedom point.
Yeah.
And we call it that because one of the things that I think is the most common thing, whether you're a small business owner, you're an employee, is you're basically exchanging time for money.
Yeah.
And time freedom point, thereby, as a definition says, the point on the calendar where you no longer have to do this to pay for your life expenses. And that number is obviously different for everybody. Like, if anybody listening or watching us is asking themselves, okay, how much do I spend every month on, my rent or my mortgage, my car, my food, my family, vacations for the year, all the things, average it out for every month. And that's the number, right?
Right.
And what we're trying to help people to do is to invest in residential real estate, where each one of the investments generates some positive cash flow. And when you add it all up over time, you get to a point where you can say, now I have all these different places that my cash flow comes in, and that adds up to my time freedom number. So I now have the freedom to say, do I actually want to exchange more time for money? Which, you might, because you love what you do, or you might say, well, yeah, but I have some other interests, I only do half time. I mean, for a small business might be hard, but if you're an employee, you could say, I want to reduce my hours. And some people I know literally said, as soon as I get to this number, I would really like to do something completely different, but I know that thing that I'm so passionate about doesn't really pay anything, right? Or at least I don't know if it would ever pay. I know somebody who loves painting, and he said to me, I'm mainly doing this and with your help because I don't know if anybody would ever buy a painting, and I would never buy a paint to sell. I paint for myself. Now, if somebody comes and says, hey, this is such a beautiful painting, can I buy it? I might actually be willing to let go of it. And he wasn't even sure about that. But the point was to have the freedom to say, I can decide how much, how little, do I want to sell anything or not, is only possible when your other needs, your passive income needs, are basically met. And that's what I'm helping people with, to buy residential real estate, where each investment makes at least a few $100 initially and then growing over time.
Yeah.
So that we're working together towards the time freedom number. And obviously there are other things. You want to also have your legal house and your financial house in order. But fundamentally, the main thing is to accumulate assets. So you're going to end up having a payday, ideally like, I don't know, 8, 10, 12, 15 times a month,
Yeah. Yeah. That is funny. As you do that, I'm overlapping that with our process, the principles-based planning. So we would call that step 5 in our system, which is velocity and focusing on cash flow. And then, what you said was have your financial house in order. So, I work people on what I call steps 1 through 4: save, protect, legacy, liquidity. And then you're 5. Like, to me, you're the offensive coordinator. I'm the defensive coordinator. Right?
Yeah,
And you
I
need both.
found, you gotta. It's easier to win. Let's put it this way: if we stay in this analogy, it's easier to win when you're ahead.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So because, and with that in mind, I rather want to get people initially a few touchdowns, meaning like a few investments. And I hope you would agree, Curtis, that when you only own 1 or 2 assets, the legal risk is reasonable, manageable, and stuff. And the more you add to that, the more risk from a legal perspective, potentially financial perspective, occurs. So I do offense first, and then as people start accumulating assets, then we get into the defensive part. But
Yeah,
we
exactly.
have to do both, and sometimes even have to do some specialties.
Yeah, exactly. So what's your framework? So if we're like you're the process that you have what you want your people to think about, and I'm sure there's like a step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Can you give us an overview of how you get people their with their time free? What one I guess was determining what does that look like, because most people don't know. You got to know what you want and why. I think is step one. But once you help them determine that, how do you get them to the result that you're doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I use different activities, but fundamentally, if we have agreed, with a new client that we want to work together, the first thing I do, and this recurs with every one of the mentoring sessions, is what I call going through the grower model. And in the very first session, we only do the grow part, and then the ER comes then with every subsequent session. And just in a nutshell, real quick, the grower model or the grow model says the first thing we want to do is identify your long-term goal, or we can also call that the big, hairy, audacious goal.
Mm-hmm.
Then we look at, and that obviously includes the time freedom number, but it's also including the lifestyle and some other things that you want to have in the future. Then we look at what is your current reality, which I think is in your system step 2 or 3, to say, okay, well, how much is coming in, how much is going out, how much is efficiently spent, how much is kind of non-efficiently, to say it mildly.
Mm-hmm.
Like I had somebody come to me recently, and they had like every streaming subscription in the book you could imagine, right? Like
Right,
it's
right.
like $300 a month on streaming. And I mean, I literally asked them, how much would you say you work on your future versus sitting in front of a screen? Yeah. And they kind of said, well, we're not really watching as much. I said, well, then why you have 6 streaming services?
Right, right, right,
But
right.
anyway, so current reality, then we go, and what are the opportunities ahead of you, and what are the obstacles? Where opportunities is typically defined in that stage. How much do you already have available to invest? And then obstacle is oftentimes, where is the money? Like some people foolishly have it in 401k plans, or how much can you actually really put aside every month? This kind of richest man of Babylon, 10% minimum. Can you really do that? And if not, why not? So that's the obstacles and opportunities. And then we look at what actions will you take from what we just discussed. That's the W.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the very first session, because we want to kind of get a baseline or foundation or whatever word you want to use. And then let's say we meet again 2 or 3 weeks later, and then we start out with the next letter in this grower model. It's the E, to say, okay, if you were a client, Curtis, I would say, hey, Curtis, we parted last time. You said you will take these actions. What did you experience while you worked on it?
Mm-hmm.
Just let you describe a little bit what was easy, what was hard, what did you not think about, where do you want help, that kind of stuff. And after we discuss that, I'm obviously going to the letter R and say, okay, so what were the results of your actions?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not, if you say I'm willing to do 5 things and you only finished 4, that's fine too, because we're on a journey, right? We're not doing a one-time thing. But then let's talk about what were the results, how predicted or unpredicted were they, but then also, did they change or do they change anything for your main goal or your sub goals?
Mm.
So that's the methodology. And one of the early things I also like to do with certain people, and it depends very much on how confident or not so confident they come across when I talk to them, is sometimes I ask them, please do me a favor and sit down, and you can do it over a couple of days, to write a letter to yourself, pretending you are 5 years or 8 years or whatever we determined how long it would take to get to this time freedom point in the future. And you were to literally, almost like a diary, write down in a letter with somebody that can only receive it in writing, what you do from like waking up Monday morning for 2 weeks in as much detail as you can. And not just, I make coffee and then I go to work, or not go to work, but really in detail. What do you enjoy? What don't you enjoy? What things can you now do that you didn't do before your time freedom point? That kind of stuff. And it really helps people to let their imagination flow a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the important part about the letter to yourself is really to say, okay, number one, I can use it over and over again to say, okay, is that still the future you envision? But number two, when you had spent time to actually kind of paint a picture in your mind about that future, it becomes like energy that helps you to actually do the work,
Right.
right? To really learn the things. And like you said, I mean, we are initially playing offense, trying to identify the first property with all the criteria that we discussed in these mentoring sessions. And then, use my network of all the connections, and anybody who becomes a client of ours, they get, access to the lenders, to the property providers, to the insurance, to the banks, and what have you, property management. So we start looking, okay, where do we want to start? Where are you comfortable investing? How much are you able to invest, and so forth. And then try to identify within the first 6 months of working together the first property. And ideally, if everything works fine, we hope to get the first property basically closed in the first 6 months.
Oh, I love that. That's action. Yeah, that's fantastic. I want to come back to something you glossed over that you said. I want to pull this out because I always talk about this. So one of the things under obstacles, you said if some people foolishly have money in IRAs or the qualified plans. So I would expand on that. They've heard me rant about it. I want to hear somebody else and why you say that.
Well, I say this for several reasons. Number one, and fundamentally in the way I understand it, is you are being told to believe that you're deferring taxes.
Yes.
That you would right now, if you say, okay, I'm making, I don't know, let's say $100,000 and I'm in the 30% tax bracket. And when you do your stuff for normal work people that supposedly retire sometime between 65 and 70, then you will make less.
Mm-hmm.
Because for some crazy reason that nobody can explain, your lifestyle will require less money. I've not found out why that would be, but that's supposedly the case.
Right.
And so you have this less money requiring lifestyle. So obviously a lower number is perceived in, let's say, 15, 20, 25 years, or however much time that still is for your audience, that you would not make as much money. Now, the real thing why I say foolishly put it in there is we all are witness right now to this crazy discussion about the debt ceiling. Right? We have $31.4 trillion, which nobody can imagine how much that is. But one thing is, if you have 3.5% interest rates, then it's not that far-fetched that 1 trillion next year will be basically paid just in interest from the federal budget. Now, if you look at that and you say, okay, well, where's the money coming from? The government that is always kind of portrayed like an entity or a business or stuff like that is nothing but an administrative organization that collects taxes.
Mm-hmm.
And for as long as I can remember, the taxes they collect are never enough to cover the costs that they have basically allowed themselves to go into. So they go more in debt, right? What does that mean long term when you say 15, 20, 25 years or whenever that perceived retirement age is? It is extremely, in my opinion, extremely unlikely if you were to have even just the same amount of money that your tax bracket is still 30%, it's probably much more likely to be 40%.
Right.
So you deferred the purchasing power. And that is the connection, right? If we go with 5% inflation for 20 years, everything is double in 20 years. It's an easy calculation, right? So even if you had the same money with the $100,000 you have right now, you can pay and buy twice as much as you can in 20 years. It's very, very likely that your tax rate is going to be higher. So you're denying yourself all kinds of stuff for this false belief that by deferring the taxes now, paying them right now, and then take the rest and invest it, that you're somehow better off. That's why I said it's foolish.
Yeah, no, listen, amen. Right. So I actually even say, here's the more accurate word than defer, postpone, right? Is what we say, you're postponing taxes because you're not saving money in tax, you're postponing them. And
Yeah, well, I agree with that, Curtis, but there's these two other things.
Okay.
If you don't do the investment right now, and I think 4% inflation is relatively modest in today's world.
Yeah.
That means if you still have 20 years to your retirement, the stuff you could buy, even after tax dollars right now, will be twice as expensive by then.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even if you just say, I want to do the same thing, I would like to have a nice car, nice vacation, blah, blah, blah. Right? And it is more likely that if you even had the same amount of money, even though the government tells you you would somehow have less, but let's say you have the same, it only buys you half as much.
Right.
Right? It buys you half as much, and for whatever comes in, you probably pay more taxes then than you pay now. So there is really no good argument to be made to not say, and I mean, the other thing is if you go to Warren Buffett or compound interest, or you talk to Curtis or Axel about real estate investing, everybody will tell you if you have a long-term view and you buy something now and you're willing to hold it 20, 30 or forever for your family legacy, it will not only increase in money, in value, it will be paid off by your tenants. It will forever generate cash flow for you. But if you start buying it in 20 years from now, you need another 20 or 30 years until it can do that for you.
Right.
So none of it, every aspect of this kind of myth that people are being told, especially when they're employees, adds up. The
Right.
numbers don't add up, the timing doesn't add up, the lifestyle doesn't add up, and the purchasing power doesn't add up. So it escapes me why anybody is doing it.
Yeah, I mean, it's you need to get liquidity use control of your capital today, right? So that
Yeah.
you can learn what Ax was talking about in terms of, deploying your capital. And so why do you like and tell me about the conditions you see out there for and you tell your mentees about residential real estate. What type is it? Turnkey? Are they finding it and buying it? Tell me a little about that process. I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, yes, residential real estate, and we define that the same like the government, anything from a single family home, duplex, triplex, or fourplex, because
Mm-hmm.
that falls under the same fundamental rules from a financing perspective as if you were to buy it for yourself and move in.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is it's by far the largest market. And when you look at the longer term perspective is what do people want? I mean, if you really go to this, White House picket fence on the hill, that's still, and I think it will always be the kind of shelter that people, families would prefer if they can afford it.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're doing from my perspective as people who invest in single family or duplexes and then rent them in a good state meaning like condition,
Mm-hmm.
to people who would like to live that lifestyle at a fair rent, we get them basically almost to that point. And the main reason why oftentimes the question comes, well, if they can rent it, why don't they buy it? Is because they haven't had the opportunity to build the down payment. Right? It's
Right.
not that they couldn't pay the amount of mortgage that they would otherwise now pay us in rent, but they have to somehow get the down payment. And I see it with my own daughter. She went to school, she had some student loans, she paid off the student loans, she lives where we live in a pretty expensive area. I mean, obviously helping her every way I can. And she will not really fall victim to the system because of what I've done, in my responsibility. But fundamentally, her age group, if I would have to lean back and say, did she really ever have a chance to get 30, 40, $50,000 together for a down payment? In all honesty, the answer is no.
No. Yeah.
Right? And to say, okay, well, if that's not possible, that means you can never live in a single family home or duplex. I think it's not okay.
Right.
And so from that perspective, that's why we're renting there, or why we're basically investing in these properties. The other thing is also, it is more likely if you go into the right locations across the country, and even though we're working with turnkey providers, so it can be literally anywhere in the country, regardless
Mm-hmm.
of where you live, which is different for most other investors that don't like to use turnkey providers. If you don't want to work with a turnkey provider, it is very tricky to buy a property that is not relatively close to where you live.
Right.
And I want to illustrate this really quick. The problem, and people are not that clear about what is the problem. The problem is if you buy a property that somebody, let's say a flipper, has renovated, they sell it to you, you go to closing, now you have this property, and obviously in every bigger place you find a property management company. So you sign a contract for them to manage it for you because you live too far away. as soon as something happens, in most cases, the first few things that happen are almost always related to the renovation. And so you're obviously saying, well, flipper lady, flipper boy, you just renovated this broke. It shouldn't have broken, fix it. They say, I have nothing to do with it. I don't know why it broke, but it's probably your tenant. Then you go to property management and say, can you figure out, in the end, this triangular relationship always leads to the fact that you're paying anyway.
Right.
And so if you, on the other hand, work with a turnkey provider who bought the property, renovated the property, sold it to me, and then manages it for me, I always say they would have to be complete idiots if they basically don't want to acknowledge if something broke that they renovated. Or if you don't just look at one deal, but if you look at a little bit more like a cluster. I own 5, several of my clients own several. So when I talk to property management, for example, in Ohio is one of our providers, we have probably 15 properties with them.
Right.
Do you honestly think that they want to say, we will never want to sell anything to you anymore, and we don't want you as a client for property management anymore for a $200 faucet?
No.
It's just not going to happen, right? But
Yeah.
that's something why I say, some people poo-poo their work with turnkey providers. But if you want to find properties where the sales price and the rent level are in a good ratio, we trying still, especially for renovated properties, to find properties that meet the 1% rule. Then I find the best, most likely way to make that work without a lot of pain and constantly having to pay stuff that you shouldn't have to pay is using a turnkey provider.
I love that. Like, I'm ambitiously lazy.
Yeah, that's
So
the other
I don't
part.
want to find, fix, swing a hammer. I would rather buy something that's already been found, fixed, flipped, renovated, and with management. And then I buy that, because you're building because people don't, you want to build so to me, what you're saying is by far, to me, just simpler and more controlled than trying to get $2 million in a 401k, right? Whereas if you could buy one house a year for the next 10 years, or 2 houses a year that's trackable. You know what I mean? And you can literally build, here's my number, here's what I get, what I average when I buy these things, and I need X amount of these to develop financial freedom for myself. That's what I hear. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But there's one additional aspect that I would like your audience to contemplate for just a moment. My role, when you ask me, Axel, in your mentoring program, what is the main thing that you're trying to accomplish for your clients?
Mm-hmm.
My answer to that is, what I am trying to accomplish for them is for them to adopt the mindset of two things: the owner of their empire and the creator of their own future. And when I say the owner of their empire, that's empire is just a word for whatever name for your company you want to call yourself, right? If you say the money for life empire,
Right.
LLC, right? That's the name of the LLC. And I want you to adopt, as one of our clients, the mindset: this is my company. I am the owner and leader of this company. Now, who are your employees? Property management is employee. The bank is an employee. The insurance company is an employer. The credit union is an employer. The car dealership that gives you your company car is an employer, and on and on and on. So you are, and that's what I'm aiming to teach you and get you to understand. I am the leader here. You're not the person who is supposed to do all the work yourself. Right. And that's a very important thing to realize. And a lot of people, especially if they never had a business, they have a hard time and need a little bit of hand holding to get there. But ultimately, that's then also happening to be what people sometimes call legacy.
Yeah.
When you say, okay, I built this company, and this is at least my complete goal, is the company will be built and all these employees will have long-term work for me. And then I'm at some point going to hand it over to my daughter.
Right.
And she is hopefully going to hand it over to her son, and on and on and on. That's my definition of legacy: is we build something, we guide it, we lead it, we make it solid. All these investments are the foundation, and they pay for me as long as I'm around, then for her, and then for the next generation. But to make that work, you have to adopt the mindset of I am creating this future for me and my family, and I'm the one in charge, and I'm not the one to swing the hammer or get calls at night for some tenant or any of that. You have people for that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that I know people that, do it themselves, trying to save it, trying to save money, do all the work. And it's, they discount their labor. You can't win that way. Right. And then you're doing it local, and local, depending on the state you're in, may not be the best place to own or buy. You want to, what did what was the show was I listening to? No, the real estate guys. You live where you want to live, but invest where it makes sense, you
Right.
know? And, do you, what I've heard just from a journal, you can go into as deep in this as you can, or want to, like there's better places for that. Midwest, Mid-South, um, areas where the laws are more favorable that you buy these types of properties in. Do you all, or where there's good job growth or that kind of stuff? Do y'all look at that kind of stuff?
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I meant with the ratio, right? Like if
Mhm.
you take my area in around San Diego, the average house, nothing special, just a normal 3 bedroom, 2 bath house is somewhere between six and $700,000. So if I really wanted to generate any kind of reasonable cash flow, I would have to rent it for $6,000 a month. Now, I know, everybody knows there is basically nobody out there that pays $6,000 a month in rent, other than some celebrities or stuff, but not normal people.
Right, right.
So if I take this house, that's maybe a 1,300 square foot house with a little bit of garden. Literally, if I could, right, like Scotty beam me up kind of fashion, take that same house and put it, let's say, somewhere in the Cincinnati area or somewhere to in Alabama or in Tennessee or places like that. Same house, same size, same property, same quality, everything. I can get one of those houses between 150 and $200,000, right? And then you say, okay, well, if I want to make the ratio work, I need somewhere between $1,500 and $1,900 in rent
Mhm.
for a nice 3 bedroom, 2 bath house with a garden. I think that's reasonable. That's doable. 6,000 is totally not doable,
Right.
right? And so that's basically, in a sense, part of the reason to go into these locations. And that's also for your audience to realize, when you want to build a portfolio that pays you basically forever cash flow. Initially, part of the cash flow is to pay off the mortgage. But then ultimately, when the mortgage is paid off and the next generation comes along, then it pays rent. As long as you keep it in a good state, it will pay rent forever.
Right.
And so the deal, and I'm sure you have heard this, Curtis, the real deal when you look at performance always is made at the purchase.
Yeah.
Right? If I buy a 600 or $700,000 house and I can only rent it for 3,500, I'm not going to get old enough to ever have positive cash flow.
Right.
Right? If
Ever.
on the other hand I can buy the same house for, let's say, $170,000 and I get $1,650 rent, I have positive cash flow from day one. And it's only going to get better because the mortgage gets paid off and the rent keeps increasing. So my cash flow keeps increasing over time. And by the time the mortgage is totally paid off, I'm probably making 2,000 or 2,500 just from that one house.
Mm.
Right. So if you go and say, well, so what's your time freedom number? And sometimes people say, let me just be brazen. My time freedom number is $10,000. Right. I say, okay, that's 8 to 12 houses. I can do the math for you. It takes about 10 to 12 years and 8 to 12 houses, and you get your $10,000 a month.
See, I love that. See, I think that I always tell people Rome wasn't built in a day, right? And so, you know what I mean? And so you've got to have, and that's not even, I mean, people work somewhere for 40 years, right? So 8, 10, 12 years is not unreasonable, because we already know the 40-year plan of deferring your life, deferring your taxes, and putting all your money in the stock market. There's a lot of evidence that may not quite work out the way you want, to put it nicely.
Yeah, that's one way to put it. I'm saying, okay, unless your audience or the people that I work
Hmm.
with are predominantly in their mid 50s,
Hmm.
anybody who is younger than in their mid 50s will get retired way before the government lets you.
Yeah.
Because if you are 55 and you go at the long end of my plan, then you're 67. That's just barely allowed for you to go into retirement and get your full Social Security. If you're 40 and I say, how about retiring at 50? That's not so bad.
No.
The biggest thing, and I'm always reminded as a German, no longer living, famous stock market financial guru, he always said, I so wish I could convince my clients, take the money, do the investments, take a pill, a sleeping pill that puts you asleep for 10 years, wake up, enjoy. Because the thing that we all fall victim to is that constantly we all hear in the media, on TV, in every movie, and what have you, people are hammering in our brains that we're not supposed to have patience for anything.
Right.
And I'm not denying that I'm sometimes a little impatient with my properties, and I wish they would grow and rent faster or they would appreciate more and stuff. But I'm constantly reminded, if I keep saying 8, 10, 12 years, I need to be willing to do 8, 10, 12 years. But if you look at it in the bigger scheme of things, anybody listening in their mid 20s, mid 30s, mid 40s, even if you think about mid 50s and you do a 12-year plan and you basically get all the government money, if there's any left on top, icing on the cake, but you're really responsible and able to do whatever you want based on your accomplishments, to me, that's a much better plan. Right. And so that's, I know 8, 10, 12 years sounds long, but if you look at, that's not any longer than it took you to even get out of high school.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that even if they're in their mid 50s, because so I'll run into this kind of stuff. So I'm thinking of clients, they're calling me. I want to think about retirement. They're 55 and they've got 100, 200,000 in their 401k or something like that. It's not going to happen. There's no way. When you look at retirement as a three-legged stool, right? Pension, just the old school way to look at it, right? Traditional way: pension, personal savings, Social Security, right? And so you just can't accumulate that much money. You're not getting those kind of rates of return. So you really need to switch the game up and do something that's a little that where you can buy income today. Now you have to learn how to do it or get with somebody like you that can help them. But I think you need a new plan. That's why I'm so excited to
Yeah,
have this talk. I
absolutely.
want you gotta need a new plan.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, even if you were to take this little example, somebody's 55, has 200,000 401k. If you basically uh, liquefy that, you pay your 10% fine, or I mean, it would be better if you were 59 and a half, but let's
Right,
say
right, right.
55. So you pay your $20,000 penalty. So you have $180,000. If you really think about it, for $180,000, you can typically get about 6 houses in
Really?
those locations, right?
Hmm.
Like 30,000 per house, each house $50,000, $150,000. So if you then have positive cash flow right from day one, with those 6 houses, you start out probably between $1,200 and $1,500 a month in your pocket,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's already taken into consideration any money put aside for repairs and for capital expenditures and for maintenance and for property management and for insurance and for the mortgage, all paid. You're making 12 to 1,500. And in all your 6 houses, think about this. In year two, you are a super nice landlord. You're only increasing the rent by $50 times six. That's $300 more. So in year two, you're making 1,800. The next year, you make more than 2,000. You can just sit down and add up, even if you ever only increase your rent $50 year over year. You can totally figure out in 10 years, you're making $3,000 on the rent increases alone. So you're probably close to $5,000 passive income, even when you start only using the money in your 401k.
Wow, there's a plan, guys. And so now think about this. Let's say you're in business. This is my mind is racing now. The you're in business, right? And so you're doing this, but in business, you have the ability to grow your income in the business, by getting better marketing, whatever trade ratio, however you do to, we call in our system get money, get more money. Well, now if you get more money and you save it, now you can accelerate your plan because you have more money available for down payments, and you get little side hustles so that why are you making money so you can save money so you can buy more assets. And then it's like now the flow is cash asset, cash, cash, asset, cash. So now you're in what I stole this from Laura Langmeyer, a wealth cycle, right? Where you can accelerate the plan with one, you got to have a plan. I think it goes back to what you start out with is what do you want and why? Step one, because that, what Napoleon Hill calls it a chief definite aim. Most people don't have a burning desire for that freedom and then a plan to get there, right? And so because if you have that, that'll pull you towards all this stuff. Once you realize, okay, people think they have a choice. You really don't.
Yeah,
So,
that's true. But I mean, there is one little thing in this whole discussion about how and what kind of retirement you want to do, that the traditional system, whether you use 401k or mutual funds or IRAs or stuff like that, typically don't ever want to talk about. If we were to say, I come to the finish line at, let's say, 65 with a 1.5 or $2 million portfolio, and somebody else has accumulated that in their 401k.
mm-hmm.
The problem that happens, or the realization that people kind of try to avoid to ever think about, is if you now want to retire and you want to take your $5,000 a month or $6,000 a month, you have to literally sell what you have accumulated, right? Because
Right.
the vast majority of it is mutual funds or stocks or stuff like that. I get my passive income and I don't have to give away anything. I will the next year, when you have given away 50,000, 80,000, however much you're consuming per year, you can do your 4% thing if you like that,
Yeah.
right? Well,
Which is really more like 2.5 now, right?
4% or 5% or whatever it is, because
Yeah.
it's actually more. I want to put this in real quick for anybody who's on this trip.
Yeah.
And nobody says this either. I don't know why today, Curtis, you bring out all the misstatements in me to clarify. It's actually, when you look at the FIRE movement, it is 4% plus inflation, right? So that means right now, this year, inflation, I would say, is probably on average 6%, right? So you would have to take 10% of your money out of your 2 million or 1.5 million thing to retain your purchasing power. I could theoretically try to do the same thing, but I still own 2 million plus worth of houses. And if we have 6% inflation, the house is also going to increase in value by 6%. Right. So that's one of the big things that people forget if you compare real estate portfolios to any kind of stock or 401k or IRA portfolios, is if you ever want to access the money that's in there, you have to sell the assets. Whereas in a real estate portfolio, you never have to sell the asset. And I warn people that want to do the FIRE movement not to forget that aspect about 4% or whatever number you are comfortable with plus inflation. I'm not so sure that there's a time very soon in the future that we're really going to get back down to 2% inflation. So if it's 3, 4, 5, 6%, you will see how rapidly you're going to consume your stock portfolio.
Yeah, because retirement's not static, and you have to sell the shares to access it. So now because the typical planning is not designed to generate cash flow. It's to build up this big pile of money, and then hopefully you can, because you're not buying dividends stocks, which would be equivalent to rental income. They're just, you're buying low, hoping to sell, hoping. This is what dollar cost average is all about, right? You're buying it here, and you're hoping by the time you're 65, the stocks are higher. And then you can start to sell them, live off of them, and hope you don't die before your money runs out. That's
exactly. But
financial planning.
I mean, if you get to 100, most people will be out of money. In my case, if you are a friendly, which I always want to be, not landlord or owner of the property, I always try to and plan for not having to increase the rent more than $50 a year. And I think that is a very fair number. But if you have 10 properties, that's $500 a month, every month more, by just doing that for all your properties.
I love that. That's
right.
nice, simple.
And all these kind of things, I mean, a lot of it is math. We just need to be aware how it works. And there's a huge difference if you lose your assets over time or you retain your assets and grow them in value over time.
My mind is racing. What didn't I ask you? I mean, this is my catch-all to make sure that I should have asked you that I want to make sure that I don't leave it out, that you want to, and then I want you to tell them, how to find you and how to follow what you're doing and that kind of stuff. Cause this is fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing, and you didn't ask me about it, but I think we both agree, is I mentioned that I want you to be acting from a perspective. Hold on a sec. I want you to be acting from a perspective of the business owner, but I really think all of it goes to mindset.
Yeah.
Right. And I
Yeah.
say most of the time, and if I had to give a spectrum of what are the left and right boundaries of the mindset that I find people, too many people, in my opinion, are at the spectrum end that says victim. I'm the victim
Yes.
of my employer. I'm a victim of the environment. I'm the victim of the climate change. I'm the victim of the gas prices. I'm the victim, the victim, the victim. And what I want to try, and not try, what I want to do with people through our mentoring program is, that, as I said, number one, make them realize that they're the owner of their empire. But with that also comes to have the mindset of the creator of your own future. You're making the decisions, you taking the actions like we discussed in the grower model. Which action will you take? Which experience will be triggered by those actions? Which results will come from those experiences? And how do they help you to get closer to your goal? Right. And that is somebody who says, I have the power to do what I need to do to get to my time freedom number, to the kind of future, to this thing that I described in the letter I wrote to myself. Right. And those are the things that all come and are related to mindset.
That's fantastic. How can they follow you?
Well, the
Or
easiest is to,
yeah.
yeah, just go to idealwealthgrower.com. And if you would like the mindset manual where you can find out where you are on that spectrum between victim and creator of your own future, you just do idealwealthgrower.com/free. There you can download a couple of exercises, a nice little story, and find out where you are right now. And if you find yourself in a spot where you don't like to be, then I'm more than happy to help you to get away from it and go to the other end of the spectrum, and really become the boss of your own empire.
I love that. That's we're aligned. Okay. I want
Yeah.
you to be the boss of your own empire. And using this, the at from right now, the asset class called real estate as the vehicle, because of all the advantages of our tax system is designed for landowners and business owners. So, because we didn't talk about, see, if you want $100,000 worth of stock, you need $100,000. Okay. And right. And so he said that, listen, if you have 180, you could get 5 to 6 properties,
Yes.
using leverage. So now all of a sudden, now you have more and you're cash flowing from the get-go. And so it's just a whole different model. And so to me, that's safer. I don't know about y'all listening, but I have like 3 pages of notes. I'm just saying. So y'all need to
Well,
go
I
back
mean,
and
if
listen to
you
this
just
again.
look around, I mean, everybody's talking about the impending recession and all this stuff. Look at which asset class couldn't be bothered more. Right. I mean, you look at stocks, they're going up and down like crazy, interest rates going up like crazy. The markets internationally, oil prices up and down like crazy. Crypto is going up and down like crazy. Real estate, they constantly say the market is crashing, and then the next month they say, holy shit, it all went up 5% again.
Right.
Right. And I'm always sitting there and saying, okay, I am very, very convinced. I think this is a good maybe statement at the end, Curtis. I'm very, very convinced, and I believe your audience and you are convinced of that too, that we are not going to go back to caves. We want to live in nice houses and nice apartments and nice duplexes if we can.
Right.
And that's, knowing that one of the fundamental needs, we need food, we need security, and we need shelter. And if the shelter can be nice, so much the better. That's all I'm trying to do, is help people to provide nice, affordable shelter so that we can all live a better life. And that will not go away. I can't imagine that people say, oh, no, I want to go back, put my loincloth on and go in the cave or anything like that.
Right. I don't think so. So yeah. So that is awesome. So we're going to put all his contact information in the show notes. I got a feeling he may be back on. All right, because I like this topic. So I'm just saying. So any I was good close, but if you have any other closing thoughts, we can do it and we can wrap this up, and I will see you next time, and make sure y'all go out and look, I'm going to put his show, listen to his podcast follow up on his mentoring, and let's get you financially free.
Exactly. I second that.
All right. All right, guys. So listen, go out there, make it a profitable day. If you like this show, give us a review, on iTunes, or if you're seeing this on YouTube, make sure you follow and leave us a comment and share. All right. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you again.